5 years can either break a man's spirit or forge it into something unbreakable, and Isaac would prove that patience, not rebellion, could be the sharpest weapon against chains. Before we continue with Isaac's extraordinary journey, hit that bell icon and subscribe to this channel to follow more powerful stories like this one. Stories that remind us of the unbreakable human spirit and the ancestors who paved the way for our freedom today. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on the cotton fields of Whitmore Plantation in the summer of 1854, turning the red clay earth into a furnace that seemed to radiate heat from below, while the sky pressed down from above. Isaac stood among the rows, his dark skin glistening with sweat, his hands moving with practiced efficiency through the cotton bolls. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. At 23 years old, he had been sold away from his family in Virginia just 6 months prior, torn from his mother's arms and his younger sister's desperate grip, loaded onto a wagon with 15 others and transported south like cargo. The memory still burned in his chest, a constant ache that never dulled, but Isaac had made himself a promise during that agonizing journey. He would not die in chains. He would be free. And unlike some who dreamed of running under cover of darkness, Isaac understood something profound about his captors. They feared the patient man more than the desperate one, though they didn't know it yet. The overseer, a cruel man named Silas Redmond with tobacco-stained teeth and a whip always coiled at his belt, rode past on his horse, his eyes scanning the field for anyone who had slowed their pace. Isaac kept his head down, his fingers never stopping their work. But his ears caught every word of the conversation Silas was having with the plantation owner, Master Whitmore. "That new one, Isaac, he's a strong worker," Silas said, spitting tobacco juice onto the ground. "Ain't caused no trouble, neither." Master Whitmore nodded, barely glancing in Isaac's direction. "Good. Keep him that way. I paid good money for him, and I expect a return on my investment." Isaac felt the words settle over him like a heavy blanket, not with despair, but with a strange sense of calculation. They see me as property that behaves well. Let them think that. Let them believe I've accepted my fate. That belief will be my first key. What neither Silas nor Master Whitmore could see was the sharp intelligence behind Isaac's quiet demeanor. Before being sold, Isaac's previous owner had occasionally allowed him to learn reading from the master's children, a dangerous gift that was meant to make him a more valuable house servant. Isaac had absorbed every word like a man dying of thirst, teaching himself in secret long after those lessons were supposed to stop. He knew that literacy was power, that understanding the written word meant understanding the mechanisms of the world that held him captive. Now, on Whitmore Plantation, he kept that knowledge buried deep, showing no sign of it, playing the role of the simple field hand who knew nothing beyond picking cotton. "Patience," he whispered to himself in the Igbo words his grandmother had taught him before she passed, words that connected him to ancestors who had survived the Middle Passage. Iwe adigi onu uzo. Patience is at the threshold. But patience didn't mean passivity. Isaac understood that clearly. The first year on Whitmore Plantation taught Isaac the rhythm of his captivity. He learned which overseers were the cruelest, which could occasionally be reasoned with, and which were simply indifferent. He learned that Master Whitmore visited his plantation only once every 2 months, preferring to live in his townhouse in Savannah, while Silas managed the daily operations. He learned that the plantation had 73 enslaved people, ranging from infants to the elderly, and that among them was a network of quiet resistance that he would need to carefully approach. There was Aunt Ruth, a woman in her 60s, who had been born on the plantation and knew every secret of its operations. There was Moses, a blacksmith whose strong arms and clever mind made him invaluable, and thus gave him a small degree of leverage. And there was Clara, a young woman who worked in the main house and whose sharp eyes and sharper mind missed nothing. Isaac watched them all, learning, waiting, saying nothing about his own plans, because trust had to be earned slowly, like the erosion of stone by water. In the evenings, after 14 hours in the fields, Isaac would return to the cramped quarters he shared with 7 other men. While others collapsed onto their rough pallets, exhausted beyond words, Isaac would lie awake, his mind working. Freedom requires a map, he thought. Not just a map of land, but a map of people, of systems, of weaknesses, of opportunities. He began to memorize everything. The guards' rotation schedule, which dogs were meanest, where the property lines ran, which neighboring plantations might be sympathetic to runaways, and which were hostile. He memorized the stars, teaching himself navigation by watching the night sky through the gaps in the quarter's walls. He memorized the sounds of the night, learning to distinguish between an owl's call and a signal whistle, between the wind in the pines and the movement of pursuers. Knowledge became his currency, accumulated coin by coin in the vault of his mind. 6 months into his captivity at Whitmore Plantation, Isaac made his first calculated move. He began to volunteer for extra work, the kind that no one else wanted. When Silas needed someone to help repair the barn roof in the scorching midday sun, Isaac's hand went up. When a wagon wheel broke on the road and someone needed to walk 5 miles to fetch the blacksmith, Isaac stepped forward. These tasks earned him nothing but exhaustion, but they earned him something far more valuable: the perception that he was exceptionally obedient, that he had no spirit left to resist. "That Isaac, he's a good nigger," he heard Silas tell Master Whitmore during one visit. The words were meant to dehumanize, to reduce him to something less than human, but Isaac heard them differently. "You're beginning to trust me. Good. Keep trusting me." With each task, he was also learning the geography beyond the plantation, seeing the roads, the landmarks, the potential hiding places. He was building his map, piece by piece, while his captors thought he was simply being broken in. The other enslaved people watched his behavior with mixed reactions. Some thought he had given up, that he had become what the masters wanted. Others, the perceptive ones like Aunt Ruth, saw something different in his eyes during the brief moments when he thought no one was looking. One evening, as Isaac drew water from the well, Ruth appeared beside him, her weathered face showing nothing but casual interest. "You's a patient one, ain't you, Isaac?" she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaac looked at her, measuring the moment, and then nodded once. "Patience is what they don't expect, Aunt Ruth. They expect rage or resignation. They don't know what to do with patience." Ruth's eyes crinkled with something that might have been approval. "My grandmother used to say something," she murmured. "She say, 'The river don't fight the stone. It just keep moving, day after day, year after year, until it carve a path right through it.'" Isaac felt something shift in his chest. He wasn't alone in his understanding. "How long you been carving, Aunt Ruth?" She smiled just slightly. "Longer than you been alive, child. But I ain't got the strength for running no more. Others do, though, when the time come." That conversation marked the beginning of Isaac's true education in resistance. Through Aunt Ruth, he was gradually introduced to the hidden world within the plantation. There was a network, not exactly organized but understood, of people who helped runaways when they could. A piece of bread saved and left in a hollow tree. A warning about patrol schedules. A song sung at twilight that carried coded messages about danger or opportunity. Moses, the blacksmith, it turned out, had helped 6 people escape over the years by providing them with tools and iron rations. Clara in the big house would occasionally have access to newspapers that Master Whitmore left lying around, and she would memorize the important information and pass it along. Which counties were tightening their patrols, where abolitionists were known to operate, which routes north were currently dangerous. Isaac absorbed all of this information, but he never spoke of his own plans. He simply listened, learned, and waited, because patience meant not just restraining action. but knowing the precise moment when action would succeed. The second year brought a new element to Isaac's calculations: the arrival of a young enslaved man named Samuel, who had been purchased at auction in Charleston. Samuel was 19, strong, and filled with a barely contained fury that Isaac recognized as dangerous. Unlike Isaac, Samuel made no effort to hide his hatred, and within weeks of his arrival, he had already been whipped twice for what Silas called insolence. Isaac watched Samuel with growing concern, knowing that this young man's rage, however justified, would get him killed if it wasn't tempered with strategy. One night, as they lay in the quarters, Isaac moved his pallet closer to Samuel's. "You're going to get yourself killed, brother," Isaac said softly. Samuel turned angry eyes on him. "Better to die fighting than live like this." "Is it?" Isaac challenged gently. "Because dead, you can't help nobody. Dead, you can't find freedom. Dead, you just dead. And Master Whitmore just goes and buys another man to replace you." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "So what you suggesting? That I just accept this? Become like you, all quiet and obedient?" Isaac smiled in the darkness, though there was no humor in it. "What you see ain't always what is, Samuel. I ain't obedient. I'm patient. There's a difference." Over the following months, Isaac began to mentor Samuel, teaching him to channel his rage into something more useful than open rebellion. He taught him to observe, to note patterns, to memorize information. He taught him that resistance didn't always look like fighting, that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance was surviving when they wanted you to break. Slowly, Samuel began to understand. His outward behavior became more controlled, though the fire in his eyes never dimmed. "He's learning," Isaac thought with satisfaction. "And when the time comes, his strength will be useful." But Isaac also knew that Samuel's presence had complicated his own timeline. The young man's rage was too close to the surface. Eventually it would boil over, and when it did, it might trigger a crackdown that would make escape impossible for anyone. Isaac's patience would need to extend to managing not just his own liberation, but timing it correctly around the volatile elements beyond his control. The seasons turned, and Isaac's map grew more detailed, his understanding deeper. He learned that Master Whitmore was deeply in debt, that the plantation was struggling financially, and that there was talk of selling off some of the enslaved people to raise capital. This information, gleaned from fragments of conversation that Clara reported from the big house, became crucial. If they're going to sell people, families will be torn apart again. The unrest will grow, the patrols will increase. But the chaos might also create opportunities. Isaac began to adjust his mental calculations, considering different scenarios, different timelines. He also began very carefully to save resources. A piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth and hidden in a hollow tree. A knife blade that Moses had accidentally dropped near the fields and that Isaac had retrieved and buried in a marked location. A piece of rope, a flintstone, small things, but things that could mean the difference between life and death on the run. 3 years into his captivity, Isaac experienced a moment that almost broke his carefully maintained patience. Master Whitmore announced that he would be selling 12 people to a plantation owner from Mississippi, and among those 12 were Clara and young Samuel. The news hit the quarters like a physical blow. Clara, who had been a source of information and hope, would be gone. Samuel, who had finally learned to channel his rage into patience, would be sent somewhere that might break that hard-won discipline. Isaac felt a fury rise in him that he hadn't allowed himself to feel since arriving at Whitmore Plantation. That night, Samuel approached him, his face set with grim determination. "I ain't going to Mississippi, Isaac. I'll run tonight if I have to." Isaac grabbed his arm, his grip tight. "Running tonight gets you killed, brother. Killed or caught, and caught means whipped so bad you can't walk, then sold anyway. That ain't freedom." "Then what?" Samuel's voice cracked with desperation. "What do I do?" Isaac looked at him for a long moment, and then made a decision that would accelerate his own timeline considerably. "You trust me?" "Yeah, I trust you." "Then you do exactly what I say when I say it. We got 2 weeks before that sale. That's enough time, but only if you're patient." The decision to include others in his escape changed everything for Isaac. He had always planned to go alone, knowing that the more people involved, the greater the risk of discovery. But he couldn't stand by and watch Samuel be sold down the river, couldn't abandon Clara, who had helped so many, without asking for anything in return. That night, Isaac gathered them along with Aunt Ruth, Moses, and 2 others. A woman named Dinah, who had 2 young children, and a man named Benjamin, who had been planning his own escape. In the darkness behind the quarters, Isaac laid out a plan that was audacious in its boldness and yet careful in its details. "We got 2 weeks," he said quietly. "In 2 weeks, there's a new moon. No light for the patrollers to track by. Also, Master Whitmore will be in Savannah for a week, which means Silas will be drinking heavy like he always do when the master's away. Moses, you can get us tools?" Moses nodded. "Tools and supplies, hidden where you say." "Aunt Ruth, you know the old stories about the underground routes?" "I know some, enough to get you started north." Isaac continued, his voice low but confident, laying out each person's role, each contingency, each fallback plan. "Clara, you got 2 weeks to get us whatever information you can from the house. Maps if you can find them, news about patrol schedules, anything. Samuel, you and Benjamin start preparing supplies, but small amounts, nothing that'll be noticed missing. Dinah, your children need to be ready to move quiet and fast. We'll carry them if we have to." He paused, looking at each face in the dim starlight. "But understand this, we only get one chance. If we run and get caught, there ain't no second time. They'll make examples of us. So everyone need to be sure, need to be committed, need to be patient right up until the moment I say move." The group nodded, their faces set with determination, tempered by the reality of what they were undertaking. Aunt Ruth reached out and gripped Isaac's hand. "You got your grandmother's wisdom in you, child. She'd be proud." Isaac felt the weight of what he had taken on settle across his shoulders, but he also felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Hope. The next 2 weeks were the longest and most dangerous of Isaac's life so far. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope with the abyss on either side. The group had to maintain their normal routines perfectly while secretly preparing for their escape. Moses crafted crude tools that could be used as weapons if necessary, and hid them in marked locations along the route Isaac had planned. Clara managed to sneak a worn map from Master Whitmore's study, memorizing it before carefully replacing it, and she reported that the patrols were currently focused on the western borders, where there had been recent attempted escapes. Isaac used this information to adjust their route eastward, planning to move through the swamps where the dogs would have trouble tracking them. Samuel and Benjamin gathered small portions of food, dried corn, salted pork, anything that wouldn't spoil, and cached them at various points. Dinah spent the time teaching her children, aged 5 and 7, to stay absolutely quiet on command, turning it into a game so they wouldn't be afraid when the real moment came. But then, with just 4 days remaining before the planned escape, disaster nearly struck. Silas Redmond noticed that someone had been taking food from the stores. Not much, not enough to be sure, but enough to make him suspicious. He ordered a surprise inspection of the quarters, something that hadn't happened in months. Isaac's heart hammered in his chest as he watched Silas and 2 other white men search through the meager possessions of the enslaved people. If they found the hidden supplies, if they discovered any sign of the planning, it would all be over. The group would be separated, probably whipped publicly as a warning, and Isaac's careful years of patience would amount to nothing. He stood perfectly still, his face showing nothing but the same quiet obedience he had cultivated for 3 years, while inside his mind was racing through alternatives, backup plans, escape routes. Silas moved through the quarters like a predator, knocking over pallets, dumping out the few possessions people had. When he reached Isaac's area, he paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're a quiet one, Isaac. Maybe too quiet." Isaac met his gaze with carefully calculated humility. "Just trying to do good work, sir. Ain't got nothing to hide." Silas stared at him for what felt like an eternity, and Isaac could see the man's mind working, trying to decide if his suspicion had any foundation. Finally, Silas spat on the ground near Isaac's feet and moved on. The inspection turned up nothing. The supplies were too well hidden, cached outside the quarters, and none of the group betrayed anything through their expressions or behavior. But the close call left Isaac shaken in a way he hadn't been before. "We're running out of time," he thought. "Silas's suspicions are up. We can't wait. We have to move sooner." That night, he made the hardest decision of the whole plan. They would leave in 2 days, not 4. It meant less preparation time, less certainty about the patrol schedules, but it also meant moving before Silas's suspicions could harden into action. He gathered the group one last time. "We move day after tomorrow, just before dawn. Everyone be ready." The faces looking back at him showed fear, but also trust. They believed in his leadership, in his planning, in his patient strategy. Isaac prayed to his grandmother's gods and to the Christian God that Aunt Ruth preached about, that he was worthy of that trust. The night before the escape, Isaac couldn't sleep. He lay on his pallet, reviewing every detail of the plan, every possible complication, every contingency. They would leave before dawn, moving through the swamp to confuse the dogs. They would travel by night and hide by day, using the network of safe houses and sympathetic souls that Aunt Ruth had told him about. They would head northeast toward the coast, where there were rumors of abolitionists who helped smuggle escaped slaves onto ships headed north. It was a long shot, a dangerous gamble, but it was the best chance they had. Isaac thought about his mother and sister, still in Virginia as far as he knew. "If I make it to freedom, I swear I'll find a way to help you too," he promised them silently. "I won't forget you. I won't leave you behind forever." He thought about all the people who hadn't made it, whose bones lay scattered along the routes to freedom, whose hopes had died in the darkness of southern nights. He thought about his grandmother's words, "Patience is at the threshold." He had been patient for 3 years. Tomorrow, patience would finally open the door. The morning of the escape came with a heavy mist that clung to the ground like a blessing. Isaac rose before the bell, as he always did. But today his movements had a different quality, purposeful, final. This would be the last time he woke in this place, the last time he bent his back for Master Whitmore, the last time he pretended to be less than he was. He caught the eyes of each person in the group as they moved through their morning routines, a brief glance that said, "Be ready, be strong. Today we become free, or we die trying." The morning stretched out with agonizing slowness. Isaac worked in the fields, his hands moving through the cotton with practiced efficiency, but his mind was tracking the position of the sun, calculating times, reviewing signals. At midday, when the work bell rang for the brief rest period, Isaac made his move. He nodded to Moses, who nodded back. The signal had been given. That night, when the moon would not rise until well after midnight, they would run. The afternoon became a blur of tension so thick Isaac felt he might choke on it. Every sound seemed amplified, the crack of Silas's whip in the distance, the bark of the patrol dogs, the calls of the overseers. Time moved both too fast and too slow, rushing toward the evening and yet each minute stretching like molasses. Isaac forced himself to maintain his routine perfectly, to give no sign that this day was different from any other. When the final bell rang and the field workers began to trudge back toward the quarters, Isaac felt his heart hammering so hard he was sure others could hear it. In the quarters, he caught Clara's eye. She gave the smallest nod, Everything was ready on her end. Moses was at his forge, pretending to work late while actually positioning final supplies. Dinah had her children in a forced early sleep, wanting them rested for the ordeal ahead. Samuel and Benjamin were coiled springs, barely containing their energy. Aunt Ruth sat outside her cabin, smoking her pipe as she always did, but her eyes were alert, watchful. Everything was in place. Now they just had to wait for full darkness. At midnight, Isaac made his way silently from the quarters, moving like a shadow among shadows. One by one, the others joined him at the designated meeting point, a small clearing just beyond the edge of the plantation property where the forest began. Moses arrived carrying a sack of tools and supplies. Clara came from the direction of the big house, her movements cat-like and silent. Samuel and Benjamin appeared together, their faces set with grim determination. Dinah arrived last, carrying her 5-year-old son, while her 7-year-old daughter walked beside her, both children mercifully still half asleep and quiet. Isaac did a quick count, 7 adults, 2 children, 9 souls betting everything on freedom. Aunt Ruth had chosen not to come, insisting she was too old for the journey, but she had extracted a promise from Isaac to send word somehow if they made it, so she would know that her help had meant something. Isaac looked at each face in the group, seeing the fear but also the fierce determination. "Remember the plan," he whispered. "We move quiet, we move together, and we don't stop for nothing until we're miles away. Stay close, stay silent, and trust each other. We are going to be free." They moved into the darkness of the forest, and with each step, Isaac felt the chains of bondage loosening, even though the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. The swamp was treacherous in the darkness, with hidden pools of water that could swallow a person whole and exposed roots that seemed designed to trip anyone who passed. But Isaac had studied this route during his 3 years of patient preparation, had memorized the paths that were solid ground versus the ones that would give way beneath their weight. He led the group with confidence, his feet finding safe passage almost instinctively. Behind him, the others followed in single file, holding onto each other's shirts to stay together in the profound darkness beneath the forest canopy. The children were remarkably quiet, perhaps sensing the life-or-death seriousness of the situation, or perhaps just too sleepy to fully understand what was happening. Moses brought up the rear, occasionally pausing to listen for sounds of pursuit. So far, there was nothing. They had perhaps 6 hours before their absence would be discovered at the morning bell. 6 hours to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Whitmore Plantation. 2 hours into their escape, they heard the first dogs. The baying sound cut through the night air like a knife, distant but distinct, and Isaac felt his blood run cold. Too soon, he thought. They shouldn't have discovered us yet. But there was no time to figure out what had gone wrong. The dogs were behind them, and dogs meant men with guns. "Move faster," Isaac hissed to the group, "but stay together. Don't panic." They quickened their pace, but the swamp was unforgiving, and haste meant mistakes. Benjamin went down hard, his foot catching in a root, and Samuel had to haul him back up. Precious seconds lost. The dogs sounded closer. Isaac's mind raced through options. The original plan had been to move through the swamp to a river, then follow the river northeast for several miles before striking out overland. But the early discovery changed everything. They needed to confuse the dogs, break their trail somehow. "Moses," Isaac called softly, "you got that pepper and turpentine mix you talked about?" Moses nodded, pulling a wrapped package from his sack. It was a crude mixture that would confuse the dog's sense of smell, at least temporarily. "Everyone stop here," Isaac commanded, his voice urgent but controlled. "Moses, spread that mixture in a wide circle around this spot. We're going to split up." The group looked at him with alarm. Splitting up went against every instinct, against every plan they'd made. "Just for a short time," Isaac explained quickly, his mind working through the new strategy even as he spoke. "Samuel, you and Benjamin head west. making as much noise as you can. Lead them away from the main group. There's a creek about a mile west. Get in that water and follow it north for 2 miles, then circle back and meet us. Clara, Dinah, and the children, Moses, you come with me. We head northeast, moving quiet. If we split their attention, some of us got a better chance. Samuel grabbed Isaac's arm. That's a suicide mission, brother. If we lead them away, we get caught. Not if you're smart about it, Isaac said, gripping Samuel's shoulder. You know how to move in the dark now. You've learned patience. Trust in that. Samuel held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. We'll see you in 2 days, Isaac. Freedom or death. Freedom, Isaac confirmed. Nothing less. As Samuel and Benjamin disappeared into the darkness toward the west, deliberately making noise to draw attention, Isaac led the remaining group northeast, moving as silently as ghosts. The gamble was brutal in its mathematics, sacrifice 2 to save 7. But Isaac knew that Samuel and Benjamin had the best chance of evading capture. They were the strongest, the fastest, and they carried no children. If anyone could lead the pursuers on a wild chase and then disappear, it was them. Still, the decision sat like lead in Isaac's stomach. This is what leadership means, he thought bitterly. Making choices that might get people killed. The sound of the dogs began to fade as they moved away, following Samuel and Benjamin's trail. The remaining group pushed northeast, their pace now more controlled, more methodical. The swamp gradually gave way to firmer ground, and Isaac recognized landmarks he had memorized during his 3 years of observation. An oddly shaped oak tree, a rock formation that looked like a crouching figure. They were on course. Dawn was maybe 2 hours away. They needed to find a place to hide before daylight made them visible to anyone searching. 4 hours after splitting from Samuel and Benjamin, Isaac led the group to a dense thicket near a small stream where the undergrowth was thick enough to conceal them. We rest here during the day, he whispered. No fires, no noise. We take turns keeping watch. Soon as night falls again, we move. They arranged themselves in the thicket, the children curling up against their mother, exhausted beyond measure. Clara and Moses positioned themselves at opposite ends of their hiding spot, watching for any sign of danger. Isaac found himself unable to rest, despite his exhaustion. His mind kept returning to Samuel and Benjamin, wondering if they had made it to the creek, if they had evaded the dogs, if they were even still alive. He had sent them to draw away the pursuit, but what if he had sent them to their deaths? This is what 3 years of patience has led to, he thought. Not just my own freedom, but the weight of other people's lives in my hands. As dawn broke, filtering weak light through the dense canopy above, Isaac allowed himself to hope that they might actually succeed. They had made it through the first night. They had evaded immediate capture. They were miles from Whitmore Plantation, and with each hour that passed, their trail grew colder. The day passed with agonizing slowness, every sound a potential threat, every bird call a possible alarm. Isaac dozed fitfully, his body screaming for real rest, but his mind refusing to fully surrender consciousness. Around midday they heard dogs again, but distant, moving parallel to their position but not toward them. Moses caught Isaac's eye and nodded. The split worked. They're still following Samuel and Benjamin's trail west. That knowledge brought relief mixed with guilt. The afternoon dragged on. The children woke hungry, and Dinah parceled out tiny amounts of cornbread and dried meat, trying to make their limited supplies last. Clara discovered a small stream nearby where they could refill their water skins, a stroke of luck that might keep them going for another day. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red visible through gaps in the forest canopy, Isaac gathered the group. "We've made it through day 1, he said quietly. "We got maybe 30 miles to go before we reach the safe houses Aunt Ruth told us about. We can do this. We stay patient, we stay smart, we stay together." The second night of their journey was less frantic, but no less dangerous. They moved through forests and across fields, always staying off the main roads, always listening for sounds of pursuit. Isaac's mental map guided them northeast, toward the coast, toward the rumors of freedom that had sustained him through 3 years of bondage. At one point, they had to cross a road, and Isaac made them wait for nearly an hour, watching, ensuring no patrols were near before they dashed across one by one, disappearing into the woods on the far side. Dawn found them taking shelter in the abandoned barn, its roof half collapsed but its walls still solid enough to hide them. They were exhausted, filthy, and running low on food, but they were alive, and they were still moving toward freedom. On the 3rd day, Dinah's youngest child developed a fever. The boy was burning up, delirious, and his whimpers of distress threatened to give away their position. Dinah held him close, her face etched with terror that had nothing to do with their pursuers and everything to do with a mother's fear of losing her child. Clara had some knowledge of herbs from her time in the big house, watching the plantation mistress treat ailments. She went out carefully, searching the surrounding area for specific plants. Willow bark for the fever, yarrow to prevent infection. Isaac watched her work with growing respect. Every person in this group had skills, had knowledge, had value that the institution of slavery had tried to deny. Here, in their desperate flight toward freedom, those skills became the difference between life and death. Clara brewed a weak tea from the willow bark, using water heated over a carefully concealed fire, and by evening, the child's fever had broken. They couldn't stay in the barn another night. It was too exposed, too close to the road. So as darkness fell, they moved again, now carrying the weakened child in shifts. The journey became a test of endurance, each night blurring into the next, each day spent hidden in whatever shelter they could find. A drainage ditch, a dense patch of briars, a hollowed-out log that somehow fit them all if they squeezed together. On the 5th night, they encountered other runaways. 3 people, a man and 2 women, who had escaped from a plantation to the south. The meeting was accidental, both groups freezing in mutual terror before recognizing that they were allies, not enemies. The man, who gave his name as Thomas, had knowledge of the area ahead. "There's a safe house about 10 miles northeast," he said quietly. "White couple, Quakers, they help folks get north. But you got to be careful. There's a patrol that works the main road between here and there." Isaac and Thomas compared routes and information, pooling their knowledge. The combined group now numbered 12 people, larger and thus more visible, but also stronger and with more hands to help. They agreed to travel together for the next stage of the journey. Thomas also had news about Samuel and Benjamin. He had heard from other runaways that 2 men had been spotted near the coast, moving fast and free. They had made it. Isaac felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank God, he thought. They made it. The safe house turned out to be a modest farmhouse on the edge of a small town, run by an elderly Quaker couple named Josiah and Prudence Weatherby. When Isaac and the group approached cautiously in the pre-dawn darkness, Josiah opened the door before they could knock, his weathered face showing no surprise, only compassion. "Come in quickly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thee are not the first to seek shelter here, nor will thee be the last." The safe house was a revelation. A root cellar had been modified with false walls, creating a hidden space where runaways could hide. There was food, clean water, and for the first time in 6 days, a sense of relative safety. Prudence tended to their wounds and blisters, speaking in soft tones about the route north, about other stations on the Underground Railroad, about the dangers still ahead, but also about the hope of freedom. Isaac learned that they were perhaps 2 weeks of hard travel from the Maryland border, beyond which lay Pennsylvania and true freedom. 2 weeks. After 3 years of patience, 2 weeks seemed both impossibly long and miraculously short. They stayed at the Weatherby farm for 3 days, regaining their strength, gathering supplies, and planning the next stage of their journey. Josiah provided them with a detailed map showing the locations of other safe houses, marked in a code only those in the network would understand. He also gave them something precious: papers, forged documents claiming they were free people of color traveling to visit family. The papers wouldn't hold up under close scrutiny, but they might be enough to avoid immediate capture if they were stopped by a casual patrol. On the morning they left, Prudence pressed packages of food into their hands and clasped Isaac's hands in hers. "Thee has shown remarkable courage and wisdom," she said. "Remember that freedom is not just a destination, it is a way of being. Never let anyone take that from thee again." Isaac felt tears prick his eyes for the first time since the escape began. These white people, who could have been killed or imprisoned for helping them, had risked everything out of pure moral conviction. Not all white people are the enemy, he realized. Some are allies, willing to fight for justice. The journey north continued, but with better resources and better information, the group made faster progress. They traveled mostly by night, using the North Star and Josiah's map to guide them. During the days, they found shelter in barns, caves, and dense forests. They crossed rivers by wading through shallow spots or using abandoned boats they found tied along the banks. They avoided towns and main roads, sticking to the margins of civilization where they were less likely to encounter slave catchers. The group dynamics had shifted over the journey. Isaac was still the leader, but Clara had become his second, her sharp mind catching details he missed. Moses provided the physical strength needed to overcome obstacles. Dinah showed resilience that amazed them all, keeping her children moving even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Thomas and his companions brought knowledge of the land that proved invaluable. They had become a family of sorts, bound by shared danger and shared hope. 3 weeks after leaving Whitmore Plantation, they crossed the Maryland border. The moment was both anticlimactic and profound. There was no marker, no sign, just Thomas pointing to a stream and saying, "This here is the line. Other side is Maryland. We're getting close to free soil." They waded across the stream, shallow enough to easily ford, and stood on the far bank, letting the significance of the moment settle over them. They were still in a slave state. Maryland still practiced slavery, but they were closer, so much closer to Pennsylvania and freedom. Isaac felt 3 years of careful patience, of strategic planning, of forcing himself to endure indignities while plotting his escape, finally approaching fruition. "We're going to make it," he thought. "By God's grace and our ancestors' strength, we're actually going to make it." That night, they pushed hard, knowing they were in the final stretch. Dawn found them within sight of the Pennsylvania border, and they hid in a dense forest to wait for nightfall. The last crossing came just after midnight. There was a bridge, a small wooden structure over a creek, and beyond it lay Pennsylvania, lay freedom. But there was also a problem. 2 slave catchers were camped near the bridge, their horses tethered nearby, clearly waiting for runaways they knew would try to cross here. Isaac studied the situation from their hidden vantage point. They could try to go around, but that would add hours to their journey and risk getting lost. They could try to cross elsewhere, but the creek was deeper and faster away from the bridge. Or they could confront the slave catchers directly. Isaac looked at Moses and Thomas. Both men nodded. They understood what needed to happen. "Clara, you take Dinah and the children and the others back into the woods," Isaac said quietly. "You wait there. If we don't come back in 1 hour, you find another way across and you go north without us." "Isaac," Clara started to protest. "No arguments. We 3 will handle this." The confrontation was swift and brutal. Isaac, Moses, and Thomas approached the slave catchers' camp in the darkness, moving like shadows. They carried improvised weapons, stout branches, a knife Moses had brought from the plantation. When they were close enough, Isaac stepped into the firelight, his hands raised. "Evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. "We seem to have a problem." The slave catchers scrambled for their weapons, but Moses and Thomas were already moving, rushing in from the sides. What followed was a desperate struggle, Isaac grappling with one catcher, trying to get the pistol away from him, while Moses and Thomas tackled the other. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, though it felt like hours. Isaac took a blow to the face that split his lip and left him seeing stars, but he held on, fighting with the strength of 3 years of suppressed rage and desperate hope. Finally, Moses managed to knock his opponent unconscious with a rock, and Thomas had the other in a chokehold. They tied both men with their own ropes and gagged them, leaving them bound but alive near their camp. "Go," Isaac said to Moses and Thomas, his voice urgent as he retrieved the slave catchers' weapons. "Get the others. We cross now." The group came out of the woods at Isaac's signal, and they all moved across the bridge together, quickly, silently, 12 souls seeking freedom. On the Pennsylvania side, Isaac paused and looked back at Maryland, at the South, at the land of his bondage. He thought about his mother and sister, still trapped in Virginia. He thought about Aunt Ruth, still on Whitmore Plantation. He thought about all the people who hadn't made it this far, whose dreams of freedom had died in the darkness. "I will come back," he promised silently. "I will help others make this crossing. I will not forget." Then he turned north and walked into his first morning of freedom. The sun rose on a new day, and Isaac, no longer property, no longer chattel, no longer bound by the chains of slavery, walked into it with his head held high. The group made their way to a town called Gettysburg, where the abolition movement was strong, and where free black communities welcomed freedom seekers. Isaac found work as a laborer, then as a teacher for other formerly enslaved people, using his hard-won literacy to help others gain the tools they would need in freedom. Clara opened a small boarding house that became a station on the Underground Railroad, helping others make the journey they had made. Moses set up a blacksmith shop and used his skills to create the tools future runaways would need. Dinah found work as a seamstress, her children attending the school Isaac helped establish. Thomas and his companions moved further north to Canada, seeking a land where they would be forever beyond the reach of slave catchers. The group dispersed, but remained connected, a family forged in the crucible of their shared escape. 2 years after reaching freedom, Isaac returned to Virginia in secret, part of a dangerous mission to extract enslaved people. He found his mother working in the same tobacco fields where he had last seen her, her face lined with hardship, but her spirit unbroken. When she saw him, free, well-dressed, confident, she wept with joy. "My boy," she said, holding his face in her hands. "My boy who I thought I'd never see again." Isaac had brought money he'd saved and forged papers. He extracted not just his mother, but also his sister and her 2 children, 12 people in total. The journey back north was perilous, even more dangerous than his own escape had been. But his 3 years of patience on Whitmore Plantation had taught him how to plan, how to think strategically, how to turn patience itself into a weapon against oppression. They made it back to Pennsylvania, and Isaac's family was reunited in freedom. He continued this work for years, becoming one of the most effective conductors on the Underground Railroad, his patient approach to planning making his missions remarkably successful. He never forgot the lesson his grandmother had taught him in Igbo. Patience is at the threshold. 20 years after his escape, after the Civil War had ended and slavery had been abolished throughout the United States, Isaac returned to Whitmore Plantation. The plantation was in ruins, its economy destroyed by the war and the end of slavery. Master Whitmore had died during the war, his debts unpaid. Silas Redmond had disappeared. Rumor said he'd been killed by freed slaves in retribution for his cruelties. Isaac walked through the cotton fields where he had once worked, feeling the ghosts of his former captivity all around him. But he walked as a free man, his chains broken not by violence, but by patience, by intelligence, by strategic resistance. He visited Aunt Ruth's cabin and found her still alive, ancient now but still sharp-minded. She smiled when she saw him. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "Knew you'd make it. You had that patience in you, just like your grandmother." Isaac held her hand and told her stories of the people he'd helped escape, of the lives that had been changed, of the small part she had played in a vast network of resistance that had ultimately helped bring down the institution of slavery itself. Isaac lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1906, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. By that time, he had helped over 300 people escape from slavery, had established schools for formerly enslaved people, and had written a memoir that was published widely. His story became one of many that illustrated a profound truth. Resistance to oppression takes many forms, and sometimes the most powerful form is the patient accumulation of knowledge, the strategic planning of liberation, and the refusal to let cruelty extinguish hope. Isaac's legacy was not just in the people he saved, but in the example he set. That patience, combined with courage and intelligence, could overcome even the most brutal systems of oppression. His grandmother's words had proven prophetic. Patience really had been at the threshold, and it had opened doors that violence alone might never have breached. The story of Isaac reminds us that freedom is not just a moment, but a journey, not just a destination, but a way of being. It reminds us that those who were enslaved were not passive victims, but active agents of their own liberation, using every tool at their disposal, patience, intelligence, community, faith, to resist and ultimately overcome their oppression. It reminds us that the human spirit, when properly nurtured and never abandoned to despair, is capable of extraordinary endurance and ultimately of triumph. Isaac's 5 years of forced labor at Whitmore Plantation became the foundation for a lifetime of freedom, and his patience became the key that unlocked chains for hundreds. His story is a testament to the power of the human will to survive, to resist, and ultimately to prevail, even against the most dehumanizing circumstances imaginable. In remembering Isaac and the countless others who made similar journeys, we honor not just their suffering but their strength, not just their bondage but their liberation, not just their past, but their lasting impact on the future they made possible for us all.